presentation of session 3, and it will be by Yomaira Reño from University of Auckland, and her presentation is titled Alfonsina Storni, an exemplary case of networking at the beginning of the 20th century. Yomaira.
Hola, sí, aquí estoy.
Bienvenida.
Por aquí, buenos días. Son las 7 de la mañana. Van a ser las 7 de la mañana. Bueno, voy a compartir pantalla y comienzo entonces con la presentación. A ver. ¿Ya se ve? Sí, creo que sí.
Sí, ya se ve. Buen día, gracias por estar.
Bueno, vamos a comenzar. Voy a cambiar a inglés, pero bueno. This is my presentation, and this is part of my doctoral studies here at the University of Auckland. So what I want to share with you is just very tiny part of my thesis. So first, I would like to start with a brief introduction, something related to Storni poetics, the canon disruption through her writing and personal alliances, and Storni's networking today, her work in the hands of the translators nowadays. So to start with the introduction, I would like to say that Storni poses a significant case of networking at the beginning of the 20th century when women's roles in cultural affairs, art, literature, work, labor, and political issues, among others, were still diminished. Storni arrived in Buenos Aires in 1911 when an oligarchy was still in power. She wanted to make a living and settle there, but working conditions were not the best due to a diverse range of factors that perhaps she did not foresee in her desire to live in the capital city. Soon she realized, and this is a quotation by Nale Roxlow, el trabajo escasea, los empleados están a merced del capricho del patrón, no hay leyes sociales que los protejan, la situación de la mujer es aún peor que la de los hombres. Before arriving in Buenos Aires, she had lived in San Juan, Rosario, and Coronda. San Juan and Rosario were in the process of becoming major commercial epicenters in Argentina due to the installation of the railway system. Coronda, where Storni studied to become a teacher, was and still is a small city in the province of Santa Fe. Storni gradually got closer to the capital, and once there, she was determined to continue working as a teacher and growing as a writer. She was not involved in any literary circle and had published some poems in magazines Mundo Rosario and Monos y Monadas while living in Rosario. So this is the first part, just a brief introduction. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about Storni poetics. So these are her poetry collections. So Storni literary work has been studied from different viewpoints. Critical perspectives on her work comprise biographical approaches, readings of critics associated with the Argentine avant-garde alongside so-called feminist criticism, and Storni's links with the consolidation of cultural modernity. Regardless of the approach employed, critics have coincided in the appreciation that Storni's life influenced the poet's literary work and contributed to revealing different features of her poetry. Her constantly evolving poetic universe borrowed features from Romanticism and Modernismo. Storni mastered the sonnet structure, which could be seen as a sign of her accepting established literary styles and managing to express herself despite formal constraints. In fact, the sonnet is a relevant piece within her poetic universe. She constantly used it as a medium to display her ideas on recurring themes such as life, death, love, women, and the city. However, her ideas were not in alignment with what was socially established, and accordingly, her poetry would also be reshaped through her exploration of an array of stylistic resources, poetic forms, and Argentina's historical events at the time. Marie Stieckos divides Storni's poetry into two groups based on her array of stylistic resources, the imagery and the language that she employed. At the beginning of her literary career, when she was a newcomer in Buenos Aires and urgently needed to show she was a talented poet in order to become part of literary and intellectual circles, Storni used rhyme, traditional verse forms such as Alexandrine and the sonnet, images chosen from the familiar spring garden. Her dominant theme appears to be love. So this is according to Stieckos. In contrast, her later poetry, Mundo de Siete Pozos, 1934, and Mascarilla y Trébol, 1938, is characterized by free verse, antisonetos, and images related to the city, current technological advances, and the sea, and her writing themes shifts from love to death. Her poetry developed according to her lived circumstances, as an immigrant, as a woman, and as a poet in a developing city. As soon as she began to become recognized, her exploration of the poetic world started to be even more intense and risky, because she was attempting to make her own aesthetic proposal while women's social conditions and roles were being transformed. So this is just a bit of her poetics, and now I would like to go to the next section, that is the canon disruption through her writing and personal alliances. So here in these pictures, we can see Storni in some, I guess, literary meetings. The first picture on the left, so you can see her there. She is at a dining table, just surrounded just by men. And in the other one, this is her last presentation with Gabriela Mistral in 1938, the year when she committed suicide. And also in the next picture, you can see her, I guess maybe it's quite difficult to spot where she is in that picture, but this was when Lorca was visiting Buenos Aires, so she was there. About her writing and personal alliances, Storni's friendships with other influential writers played a relevant role in her career, enabling her to attain many professional goals. For instance, she managed to publish in magazines such as Caras y Caretas, Nosotros, Atlántida, La Nota, and the newspaper La Nación. Posse, one of the persons who made research regarding Storni, emphasizes the role of Roberto Giusti in promoting her work, as he made space for the publication of her poems, columns, and reviews of her poetry in Nosotros, la revista Nosotros, from 1916 onward. Additionally, in 1916, Storni published her first book, La Inquietud del Rosal, with a prologue by Juan Julián Lastra. She was a member of literary circles in Buenos Aires and was commissioned, as we were also talking about translation, she only made one translation in her life, and she was commissioned to translate a selection of poems written by Delphina Bunch in French. So Storni translated those poems into Spanish. She became well known among Argentinian writers and received several awards for her literary works. The Consejo Nacional de Mujeres Prize for her poem Canto a los Niños, the Ciudad de Buenos Aires Poetry Prize, and the second prize of National Literature for her book Languidez. In the last months of her life, she had the opportunity of giving a talk with acclaimed writers Juana Ibarburu and Gabriela Mistral at the University of Montevideo. Undoubtedly, Storni's appearance in literary circles of the time is remarkable and is mainly the result of her attributes as a writer. However, few scholars mention that it was also the result of her camaraderie with renowned male writers such as Giusti, José Ingenieros, and Horacio Quiroga, who wrote favorable reviews of her work and provided support. Critics have frequently focused on Storni's search for love, but little is said about the fundamental role of friendship in her career as a writer at a time when women's literature was not sufficiently appreciated in Latin America. According to David Viñas, historical facts are vital to explain her presence in literary circles. Aquí, one quotation. Los procesos de modernización y los cambios políticos y sociales impactaron dentro del campo literario, produciendo un desplazamiento, especialmente en cuanto se refiere a la producción literaria de mujeres entre 1919 y 1930. La crispación de los escritores gentlemen se ha convertido en ternura, deslumbramiento o complicidad. El centro de gravedad literario se ha desplazado hacia la clase media, proceso corroborado por el deslizamiento de La Mansilla, escritores Gorriti o de la Barra, señoriales, en dirección a la Storni, inmigrante y subversiva. Viñas has emphasized that middle-class involvement in Argentinian literary circles originated with the process of modernization, encouraging change at different levels in Argentinian life, particularly in Buenos Aires, and bringing about social, economic, political, and cultural transformations. Now, I would like to conclude with the next section in this presentation, that is Storni's networking today, her work in the hands of the translators. So I have had the opportunity to interview some of the translators who are still working on her work, working on her poetry. So in this last section, I will share with you some of the insights based on their interviews I have had the opportunity to make. So according to Alicia Salomone, Storni's work began to gain interest among international research centers in the 1980s, when criticism of her work substantially shifted, probably due to the consolidation of a critical feminist perspective on Latin American literature developed both in Latin American countries and abroad. On the contrary, her work appears to be first of interest to translators. In 1921, Alfonso de Pasquale translated a selection of Storni's poetry in Italian, entitled, I don't know Italian, but I would try to read this. Poesie celte di Alfonsina Storni, primi saggi de traduzione della grande poetessa argentina, which is preserved at the Library of Universidad de Buenos Aires. Afterwards, Storni published her only collection of prose poetry, Poemas de Amor, in 1926, which was probably translated into French by Max Desroux in the same year. If so, this would be her first book wholly translated. Storni's poetry has been included in anthologies such as the ones you can see on the screen, Anthology of Contemporary Latin American Poetry in 1947, edited by H.R. Hayes and Doddle Fitz, and Spanish American Literature in Translation, 1963, edited by Willis Knapp Jones. Furthermore, several Storni poems have been translated especially to English and published in literary magazines. However, her poetry appears to have regained importance among translators in the last decade. In this regard, I would like to refer to some recent translation projects in French and Portuguese, with the purpose of highlighting that Storni's poetry continues to be the reason to get in contact with other people interested in her life and work. So, in a recent interview, the Galician poet Claudio Rodriguez Fer stressed that the main reasons to translate literary texts can be comprised in the following terms: pleasure, prejudice, easiness, rapture, and love. Based on the translator's experience with Storni's poetry, it could be said that their translations have been guided by pleasure, rapture, love, and perhaps to some extent literary justice. For instance, Wilson Alves de Serra mentions that Alfonsina estuvo 100 años inédita en Brasil, lo que me parece inexplicable. Me parecía fundamental que tuviéramos una antología suya, al menos por acá. In the same line of thought.
Your time's up, so if you can wrap up.
I'm about to finish.
Great.
In the same line of thought, Monique Marie Imrie states, and this is what she said, I'm not going to read this because of the time. I just want to read the last part of my presentation, that is this. This is an example of how a literary work can serve as a meeting point for several generations, as Storni achieved acknowledgement among the literary circles at the beginning of the 20th century, thanks to her talent and networking, and nowadays her work is still the starting point not only of research, but also of fruitful academic relationships. Thank you very much. That was my presentation.
Thank you so much, Yomaira. And now we have a couple of